Welcome back. It's dungeon time. Well, sort of. My approach for the first floor of the dungeon is pretty simple. I first check the spawners. They're both zombie spawners, which is not ideal, but I can work with it. Since the dungeon is fairly well lit at this level, I'm able to block up the floor, ceiling, and enough of the walls to feel reasonably comfortable that I won't get ambushed. Roof and floor holes are lethal in this mod pack. Mobs can and will gank you from the ceiling, and if you fall at a bad time, you're pretty much 100% toast. After the dungeon floor is barricaded up, I sit myself in the corner and slowly pick off the zombies where they can't reach me. A block in front of me prevents gravity zombies from pulling me off my perch, and there are very few situations where a zombie or zombie variant could hit through that block, so I take the time to farm out the rest of the zombies for XP levels. If I'd gotten a bad spawner type, like blazes or creepers, I would have just broken the spawner immediately. You might think I'm being overly cautious. I assure you, I am not. Creeping up to the second floor, I immediately destroy the skeleton spawner. Skeletons themselves aren't especially threatening, but they are inconvenient to deal with and hard to pull into a farmable position. I again block up the ceiling and enough of the walls to allow zombies to spawn, and then farm out that spawner as well. By the time I'm ready to push to floor 3, my spear is nearly broken, and it's almost nighttime. After a quick rest and resupply, I get to the third floor and find that it's slightly more complicated than the first two were. This floor also has 2 zombie spawners, which should be easy to clear, but the one above it has at least 1 skeleton spawner, and it keeps dropping skeletons from the roof. After carefully clearing out what's already dropped, I block up the roof, killing a couple of weak internals in the process, and am able to farm out the rest of the floor. My XP then immediately goes into defensive buffs and some useful levels, because there's really no sense wasting it. Floor 4 is, as expected, 2 skeleton spawners. Since it's daytime and floor 5 sees the sky directly, and as such won't drop reinforcements on my head, I'm comfortable with pushing in aggressively and taking out the few mobs on the floor before breaking both the floor 4 and floor 5 spawners. Skeleton spawners aren't really worth farming right now, and it isn't worth my time to make a box to farm the ones on the roof. A quick stop to drop what little loot I got from the process off, and I head back into the farm, this time clearing out the subfloors. Since I have control of the roof, I can drill a hole down through the dungeon to shine light on the situation, which also has the convenient effect of suppressing mob spawns. It won't deal with what is already there, of course, but it does prevent me from being swarmed too quickly. The first basement floor, now vulnerable to sunlight, then is secured in short order. I even got greedy and farmed out the skeleton spawners rather than destroying them. Fun fact for you RLCraftians, skeletons are perfectionists, and will only shoot at you if they can try for a headshot. Thanks to the power of geometry, I arrange dirt so that skeletons can only see my bottom half. Skeletons, despite only shooting for the head, are still super into feet, so they'll all group up around me, but they can't see my head, so no shots are fired. The last subfloor ends up being much harder to get than clear, since most of the mobs have already spawned from the spawners that were down there. After a massive slugfest in the stairwell, and an even more massive slugfest trying to push into the floor proper, their defense crumbles almost immediately, leaving me as the last goose standing in this particular dungeon. The loot you get from this kind of dungeon is also terrible, by the way. The best thing I got was 7 iron ingots. The whole point of this was to get XP though, so I consider it a success. The paltry loot from this dungeon is fine though, because the next one is a doozy and has actual stuff in it. Assuming I can clear it out without getting myself pasted to the floor. To be quite honest, I'm not entirely certain I want to try and take this dungeon on, since if memory serves, it's mostly staffed by pillagers, wither skeletons, vex, and witches, and all of them are hilariously dangerous right now. I do decide I want to take a crack at the stables, though. There are wither skeleton spawners in the stables, and wither bones, when combined with dragon bone I sourced from my ice dragon skeleton back in the first episode, make for nice weapon upgrades. As before, my goal is to first secure and isolate an area before farming mobs from the spawners, so I clear-cut a bunch of the surrounding trees, block up the exit points, and in general just do my due diligence. What follows is essentially an exercise in patience. Remember, I don't need to push in and clear spawners in this mod pack, since I can just grind down the mobs that spawn from them. I only came here for a couple of wither bones, which I got from my first few wither skeleton kills, and if I wanted to farm XP, I would just find an easier dungeon. The goal here is loot, not mob drops or XP, which means I can afford to take it super slow and take confirmed kills, even if it means I won't get the experience or drops from them. Case in point, normally I would want to avoid skeleton free-for-alls, since I don't get the goodies from them. In this situation though, it just saves me on tool and armor durability, so have at it. This plan ends up working great, until when I'm sneaking in to block off a path Vindicators could use to advance on me, a Banshee pops out of the ground and screams at me. This alerts the Vindicators, and more problematically, inflicts me with an undodgeable debuff that makes me unable to control my own movement. With Vindicators coming in, I try to place water to keep them away from me, since their axes can break my shield, but it doesn't spread fast enough and I go down in one hit. For those of you who are unaware, Lycanites is a mod that was designed by someone notably endowed with programming skill, and even more notably endowed with a complete lack of respect for basic Minecraftian modding conventions. You will be happiest if you just treat everything from this mod as a meme, because it does not play fair or mesh with the rest of the game at all. Oh well, unfair deaths are still deaths, so I'm on to World 3. This world, once again, starts in a cold biome, but with a little twist. Trees. Lots and lots of trees. After doing my usual setup, I get myself enough gear to not freeze to death, get some food, some tools, and some water, and begin the process of liquefying Mother Nature for sweet, sweet experience. Which, really, you all should be pretty familiar with, given the other series I'm running right now. I could probably come up with a witty quote about how knowledge is universal or something, but sadly, I'm too stupid to put pants on right now, so rain check. The second day ends up seeing me distracted with more prep work. I need a little bit of iron to make my plan work, which requires me to make several very ill-advised attempts to extract the stuff from a nearby meteor crash site set piece. And I very nearly fry myself in the process from the swarm of geonox and lava-spawned demons in the area. I do eventually get what I need, though, which brings me to the second part of the operation. Namely, that of cramming as much wood into my inventory as is physically possible. Which is a fair bit, admittedly, but is less than I would like, because a blood moon is rising, and kicking me underground is the only safe way to survive. Unlike in New Horizons, blood moons in this mod pack are bad news, so I switch over to the third part of the plan, which is turtling like a coward. One nice thing about the whole no tree punching mod being installed thing, these logs, when combined with the turbo turtle strategy, are essentially liquid XP waiting to happen for any enterprising miner. Of course, this just leaves out the awkward part where I have no idea how I'll make this interesting to watch, so, well, that solves itself pretty quickly, I guess. I got ganked by a Geonoc. Next world, please. World 4 is very promising. A lot of leather on the hoof, a nice climate, a village in the horizon, a convenient set piece with lots of silverfish to mine out for XP. Of course, this all goes sideways when I try and get some stone for a shield, which spawns a silverfish. Killing the silverfish gets me stuck in a web and summons another Lycanite mob with another bold status effect that makes you wander around randomly in terror. And I succumb to bad game design once again in short order. Lycanite mob effects were made by an idiot. Moving on. World 5 is, on the face of it, a little bit worse than World 4, but it quickly evolves into something good. After a rocky start where I spawn uncomfortably close to a dragon and nearly get my head taken off by an angry water elemental, I'm able to make my way to a nearby village, which I then loot to the ground. Some things really do never change. Now, much more stocked up, I make sure I've activated the waystone and continue on my journey. While mining is probably the safest way of progressing, it is also incredibly slow and boring. My previous attempt took well over 3 hours, for reference, and not a moment of it was worth recording. So it's back to journeying overland for me. A nice iron ore set piece and some running in mortal terror later, and I trip over something even more interesting. This is another kind of boss mob, but one that's significantly rarer. It also is one of the weakest mobs that can even be a boss of this type. Of course, that means I'd gank it and then take out a couple of the infernal silverfish that spawn on its death. This leaves me with a hefty score of XP and a bunch of useless enchanted books. Well, mostly useless. One of them happens to be a mending book, which is more than a little bit broken to have this early in the game, since you can apply it to certain kinds of healing consumables and have them repair themselves. Very good find. This is immediately ruined by a purple fire banshee, which is yet another kind of boss mob, clipping out of the wall and stabbing me with no chance of self-defense or retaliation. At least Mojang had a good sense to not make Vex part of the core gameplay. Lycanites, you could stand to learn a couple of things from them. Next! World 6 is a promising world that spawns me near a kind of jungly scrubland, with a big pine forest biome in the distance. I do my usual setup, and when faced with a bunch of trees and jealously nursing just a little bit of an ember of resentment in my heart, I do what any normal person would in this situation. I clear-cut the entire dang forest. All of it. Mine. I was fully intending to just cart this wood around with me, but it turns out I don't have to, because after an enormous lag spike, this thing spawned in behind me. This is an enormous village set piece, and is absolutely jam-packed with wonderful things for me to steal, trade with, and exploit for my own personal benefit. Let's get started. First thing, those iron golems need to go. Iron golems, in my Minecraft world, more like iron ingots. Of course, this means I have to make sure I don't get obliterated by the things, which is where my handy-dandy new pike comes in. It's very long and very stabby, and hopefully will help me not accidentally clip a villager and get the entire place mad at me, because I'm not going to survive if I do. Hey, are you still angry? Ooh, yep, yes you are. Yeesh. Yep. Still angry. I do not know why I bother prepping and collecting items in these worlds. They never last long enough to matter. Next! World whatever this is now is apparently the beach episode. As is typical for RLCraft, this means it does not feature a relaxing sandy beach getaway and a large quantity of scantily clad anime figures, and instead it drops me in the bottom of an ocean. Fun. At least there's enough stuff nearby to make a boat and some earplugs. This ocean is not a friendly place for those without the ability to move and plug their ears thanks to sirens and less than friendly glitching land snakes. So once I've secured what loot I can, I very quickly move on. Yet not going that way. I know this is superstition and I know that these things just spawn randomly, but I still want nothing to do with any area that happens to have 2 dead tier 4 ice dragons just chilling on the shoreline. No thank you. Plus I'm just tired of freezing all the time. The ocean has plenty of nice set pieces out there, I'll go visit them. Case in point, here's 2 dungeons. The tower is probably too dangerous for me to attack directly just yet, but I have cheesing the thing down to an art by now, so I decide to breach a hole in the ship behind it and do a little gank and spank. Other than one moment where I accidentally sit down on a slab on the other side of the wall that I was hiding behind, it goes off without a hitch and the boat is soon mine. I even get a nice pet parrot hat, which I can't wear because sirens will suck me into the ocean if I take my earplugs out, but it's the thought that counts. When clearing out the infernal lookout from the crow's nests, I am even rewarded with proof that RNGesus has a sense of humor, because I am given an Ender Queen crown as my reward. The Ender Queen crown is supposed to be a beneficial item. It makes it so Endermen will never attack you, they will defend you if you are attacked, and gives you passive reach distance and makes you immune to cold. Even better, it has a roll that gives me more max health, which is great. The problem is it also makes you teleport randomly if you're shot at by a bow-wielding mob, and makes you start taking damage when you're in water after a very short grace period. Basically, I cannot use this, at least not when clearing dungeons, but it's okay to toggle on and off again to keep me alive on the open ocean. Trying to take on the tower ends up being a cluster truck of incredible proportions. I'm able to break the spawners on the first floor, albeit barely, but end up nearly dying from water damage because I forgot to take the stupid crown off. That was mistake 1. Mistake 2 was trying to clear out the zombies on the side of the entrance to the dungeon. I'd barricaded the first floor correctly, but the second floor was not blocked up yet, and hitting zombies attracted reinforcements that jumped out of the second floor and smacked me into the dungeon proper. Not ideal. I survived because the water was flowing in from the holes where I broke the spawners, and was able to climb onto the chest and start farming them that way. And farming. And farming. Yeah, these zombies just would not stop coming. Eventually, the sheer force of mob cramming was enough to shove them into the chest I was hiding on, but again, I was able to retreat thanks to the water. I ended up holing up in a corner, stabbing zombies as I went, and the dang things just still would not stop spawning and reinforcing. I was eventually so low on weapon durability, I pulled back and tried to craft a wooden mace. But, of course, it got one of the worst rolls in the game and ended up being entirely useless. As night fell, it got too cold to continue fighting the zombies, so I retreated back to the boat to get some sleep. The zombies then proceeded to swim out of the tower using the ocean to extinguish themselves and lay siege to the boat, only to be thwarted by a swarm of vacuum sharks that were circling nearby. So, to summarize, I've flubbed my tower engagement, I have basically no weapons, I have no supplies, and then I am also surrounded by a pack of sharks in a feeding frenzy from all of the undead that were trying to siege my boat. What do? Basically the same thing I always do. This is RLCraft. This is pretty much just a normal Tuesday morning. I'm able to craft a pike from chunks of salvaged boat and string from the sails, which lets me stab the vacuum shark, the Roa, my bad. Don't worry, vacuum shark, I'll remember that again in the future. That then frees me up to bridge over to the dungeon using a combination of sponge and TNT, because that seems like it's a great building block, and salvage some more chunks of my ship and get back to dungeon cracking. Clearing these from the bottom up without just cheesing them and breaking the spawners is a slow, dangerous, and delicate procedure, and involves quite a lot of me placing upside down stairs in corners and delicately poking mobs through them. But I do manage to get a fair ways up the tower and clear myself some breathing room. On the 4th floor, I encounter cave spiders. Unlike most of the other mobs, which I really don't care about at all other than wanting them gone, I do want to kill cave spiders, since they have a chance of dropping bezoars, which are a bauble that grants poison immunity. More importantly, these baubles can also go in any slot in your bauble inventory and have quality modifiers associated with them, which means I want to get as many good versions of them as possible to stack buffs with. Of course, the problem with the whole process is that cave spiders are, poisonous. And even though the poison can't kill me, it can take my already very limited supply of healing items quite quickly. The whole issue is further complicated by the presence of a purple fire boss mob. These suckers are dangerous. They usually have incredibly strong natural defenses, an utterly lethal speed modifier and damage output, and to top it all off, they often will just straight up kill you when you hit them from thorns damage. The only way I've found to kill these things reliably is drowning them to half a heart, tanking up on damage mitigation effects, and just hoping that I don't get thorns to death on the one hit it takes to finish them. Of course, they also reward you with a bank of experience and a bunch of heart shards, so they are still well worth killing. My plan is to isolate the purple fire zombie in a box I build under the floor. If I'm careful, I should be able to drop it in, roof it off, and then separate it from the rest of the mobs. That plan is immediately ruined by several zombies figuring out parkour and somehow getting behind my lines. One of them happens to be the purple fire zombie. Amazingly, this does not kill me, though by all rights it probably should have, and I'm able to jump off the tower into the ocean and secure myself before the zombies can get too many hits in. But this was a close run thing. If any of those attacks had hit my chest or head, this world would be donezo. This leaves me with an incredibly value and dangerous boss mob right outside my dungeon wall, which is admittedly a much easier spot to deal with it with, but is also significantly more dangerous. So after patching myself up, the plan is back on. And then is immediately back off after the thing sneaks around me again and manages to come in the wrong side of my new mob trap. This sucker just does not want to cooperate. I'm finally able to wiggle it down into a cage, and then just am left with the task of figuring out how I'm going to transfer water to this thing to start drowning it. Thankfully, this is pretty trivial, because water spreads. I apply myself, and then I sit down to wait. And stab. It's not enough heart crystals for an upgrade, but it is a bunch of XP, which is never going to be missed. And then I immediately get ganked by a ninja zombie doing ninja zombie things. Next. This world starts in a jungle. Great, I love jungles. Unfortunately, I am an idiot. I think I have trapped this amphitheater, so I stab it, and then violently realize that it was not trapped at all. Next. World 9? I think it's 9. It's kind of lame. It starts off on the coast of a desert, gives me some seeds, and a free flint and steel. I'm then almost immediately able to put that flint and steel to use as a weapon of self-defense, and burn to death a crake that has kept trying to munch on my tail feathers. I also found a tier 5 fire dragon in the desert, so I'm now very invested in not throwing. Which means that this will probably be a turtle attempt once I get enough stuff to make that work. Operation Don't Ducking Throw sees me prepare to cheese a low-tier dungeon. After a great deal of careful spawner breaking and more than a few close shaves, I am able to get all of the above surface spawners cracked, netting myself a whopping 1 diamond in the process. Rather than fight the remaining mobs fairly, I retreat and just let them despawn. No throwing. This same procedure repeats, but in reverse for the lower floors. I pop the spawners, clear out the remainder of the mobs, and net myself a whopping 4 iron worth of loot, and an iron helm, which is terrible. More not throwing actions then include breaking down the lapis roof of a random set piece and making a bunch of javelins to hunt desert cockroaches. Sorry, jousts. As long as you kill the alpha, the rest of them are neutral, mostly, despite giving hostile mob amounts of XP, so they make for some pretty easy pickings. That, combined with the sacking of a few various set pieces and a desert temple, sees me stockpiling a bunch of diamond, iron, and gold. I'm ready to turtle. The only problem is I don't have enough wood. I have run around this area enough to know by now that I'm on an island composed of only a desert and a savanna. In order to make turtling effective, I need more wood than these biomes can provide. Even after deforesting the savanna, I only end up with a couple of stacks of logs, which is pretty pathetic in the grand scheme of things. I could probably have gotten another stack, but there was a glitchy water snake acting like a toddler on a trampoline near a bunch of them, and I'm just not going to throw over a handful of logs. While I could, in principle, tunnel under the ocean and look for new biomes that way, it would be incredibly slow, and surfacing would be very dangerous since hostile mobs would have had time to spawn in. I decide that a better bet is to just try and book it across the ocean, stopping for nothing except set pieces large enough that I can safely relaunch. And hopefully this will prevent hostile mob spawns from catching up to me. So I guess in impersonating Timmy the Turbo Turtle, I can now do Randy the Running Rabbit. Joy. This works out about as well as you would expect, and I get munched by a sea serpent in about 30 seconds. So there goes that run. Lesson learned, do not go in the ocean. You are not an albatross, you are a goose. The next world ends up being pretty well set up though. A friendly biome, lots of wood, a free village, and enough leather to get myself going. All that good stuff, and skip! Wow, look at that. 2 hours of prep work gone in the blink of an eye. Isn't movie magic great? At this point, I have entirely looted the village, and am just picking up any loose iron and coal I can find in the surrounding countryside. I was lucky in the village, and sourced a couple bits of diamond pet armor, so my diamond situation is pretty solid right now. And right now my goal is just getting enough experience to craft and enchant some diamond gear. It turns out that alpine logging tends to irritate air elementals. Unfortunately for them, I've already obtained the hard counter to their levitation nonsense. Tamer Bucket. Which is not to say, however, that they aren't flipping annoying, so I end up cutting my losses and get underground. I could have deforested a little bit more, but honestly, I'm pretty well set up as it is. Of course, with my luck being what it is, I can't even dig a mineshaft without tripping over a dragon nest, so yeah, I also ticked the dragon off. Yikes. Despite being underground, dragons aren't really diggers, so I'm fine as long as I don't do anything stupid, but those suckers are so large that they can clip through walls 8 or 9 blocks thick, so I'm going to be giving this one quite a bit of buffer room. I find that a good rule of thumb is if you can see the nest, you are close enough to get bit. Of course, that's obviously not what I do. I instead go up to the surface and see if the dragon's flown away yet. You see, normally when you attack these things, they tend to fly up to the surface if they can't reach you. I'm not sure what set this one off, but I do know that once they leave a nest, they won't return to it, and I want to see if I can snag some of the loot. My little survey doesn't turn up anything suspicious, so it looks like it's still down there. Say what you will about dragons, but they are not subtle creatures, and I feel like I would have noticed if a giant 40-block long flying lizard was barbecuing the countryside. Oh well, back to mining in the other direction. So I debated just doing a big, huge mining montage, but then I realized that would be boring, and lame, and require a thematically appropriate CC0 licensed bit of music. Instead, I'm going to share a little tidbit of fun information for you. Did you know that your statistics track the number of items you craft? After single-handedly supplying the kitchen cutlery and lighting demands for an average-sized city-state, I am a little bit bored of playing Turtle, and have good enough gear that I feel like I can cheese a few dungeons again. Which means I'm essentially back right where I started in this episode at the very beginning. Yay for progress! At least one very expensive and time-consuming lesson was learned from the whole thing, though, and that is that even now, I am consistently underestimating just how dangerous mob synergies are in this pack. My first stop is back at the village, where I activate the Waystone and take a pit stop at the local library. The library didn't have anything super interesting in it when I was earlier on in my run, but it did have a Silk Touch book, which means that I can now haul around bookcases without having to recraft them every time I want to make an enchanting setup. It also has a book with the Curse of Possession, which, ironically, is actually a good thing. This curse makes it so you can't drop an item. You have to put it in a chest and break the chest to move it around. In addition to being largely harmless and preventing other curses from being applied to whatever it's enchanted on, it also hard counters the Sticky Infernal effect, which is a hard requirement in the late game. Unless you want a random zombie to steal your armor-piercing 700 HP dealing death sword and then use it on you. With that errand out of the way, I'm now free to wander the world as I please. After not much wandering at all, I stumble across my first dungeon tower. Cool, this'll work. I have gear, it's a known dungeon variant with a known mob pool and a predictable layout. This is basically the best case scenario, should be no problem at all. Yeah, right. I don't even get inside the dungeon before things start going pear-shaped, and I have to run from a fire elemental spawned by a nearby set piece that I didn't have time to secure. Also, this dungeon apparently spawns blazes, which are pretty much pants-sweatingly terrifying and do an absurd amount of damage in large groups. That little accident is all it takes to convince me that this is going to be one of those dungeons. So I secure it properly and selectively break all of the zombie and skeleton spawners that I can reach. I still want blazes, since I need blaze rods, and I will always want to farm cave spiders to see if I can get good bauble drops, but leaving the rest of the spawners up too is just asking for a bad pull or a champion spawn to rock my day. It's going to be another slow and steady for this one. Happily enough, my efforts to secure the cave spider spawner bear fruit, and I'm rewarded with a Bezoar. It isn't a fantastic roll, but it does give me a marginal improvement to my attack damage, and the passive effect means I'm now entirely immune to poison, so it's still well worth equipping. This passive goes a long way to reducing the risk that comes from engaging with a whole bunch of mobs, and completely counters the poison effect of Infernals. It's a very good early game drop. Now I just have to figure out how to deal with the rest of the dungeon. It turns out that the answer to that question is slowly. Very, very slowly. This dungeon also throws no less than 4 purple fire mobs at me, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. Good, because now I have a massive increase to my natural health, and bad, because the things are terrifying. The dungeon also has no loot, by the way. Like, literally the most valuable thing in its one chest was a loaf of bread. The only thing I got out of doing this dungeon was whatever dropped from the mobs and a few iron ores that spawned on the bottom floor. With that dungeon done, it's time to do it all over again with the second one right next door. Same kind of dungeon, same kind of non-existent loot, still a pain in the butt. Rather than directly secure the perimeter, I just nerd pull my way up to the top and take it from the top down. Securing perimeters is great, but there's basically no way a mob can get behind me if I start above them, so it's just faster and safer this way. As to be expected, no loot. The real reward here is the relatively risk-free XP, which I plan on dumping into defense until I hit level 24. This is the level that unlocks Dragon Scale armor, which is going to be my go-to armor type for the foreseeable future. I am still quite a ways off of that, both in terms of XP and in terms of how likely it is that I will survive a dragon encounter. I'm still quite a ways off of that, both in terms of XP and in terms of how likely it is I will survive a dragon encounter. That likelihood is currently resting somewhere between "you must be joking" and "not a snowball's chance," for those of you who are wondering. So I will need to gear up a bit more first. That whole process will have to wait until the next episode, though. Thank you for watching, and for your time. I've taken the time to capture some banshees, reskinned them as the YouTube engagement buttons, and placed them down below if you feel like making your opinions about the Lycanite mob balance known. And I hope you enjoyed.